Joseph, we touched upon this in the headlines right at the beginning. Now, releasing violent prisoners early is risky, admits the Justice Secretary. When we were discussing this right at the beginning of the headlines, everyone's like, oh, is this Labour, is this Labour? No, actually, Rishi Sunak's government had already started doing this. This is in order to alleviate prisons, but then you and I have talked about they need to go back one and look at court hold-ups and all of this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And maybe a completely different model, like the Dutch model of crime and punishment. But let's talk about the legalities of this, because a lot of the press is making out that they're just going to fling open the doors and let everybody out. But no, it's not. It's a little more involved than that, is it not?
Yeah, and first of all, good evening to you. Good evening to everybody at home and on the move as always. Well, this is not about just letting prisoners go, some kind of opening of the floodgates of the wrong uns in society onto street to loot. In fact, it's probably the rationale behind it. It's necessary. I wouldn't say it's knee-jerk, but it's an emergency measure, and that's because we've got a massive problem with prison overcrowding, which isn't just about conditions. It's about literally prisons can't have any more people, and we're within a few hundred of capacity, which means that one busy weekend where a few people get arrested at a couple of football matches, and all of a sudden we could have a situation where prison cells are being provided by police, and police are basically performing the role, Tricia, of prison officers instead of patrolling the streets. And we know there aren't enough police already. We've also got kind of constitutional problems, because if someone gets arrested, they should expect to be taken to court. There is concern that people won't be able to be taken to court to decide whether they can be bailed, which you'd imagine. I mean, the right to liberty while you're waiting for your trial should be one that's sacrosanct, unless there's a good reason otherwise. Well, those things won't be possible if courts are too scared about remanding people. Those hearings will be delayed. It's chaotic. It's a situation that's been inherited, and basically over a period of many years, rather than building prison places, rather than trying to rehabilitate prisoners, there's been a kind of throw them in, who cares about the overcrowding, and just we'll just throw away the key, and we won't really worry about rehabilitation. And instead you have this situation where prisons are just rammed, and there's no emphasis whatsoever on getting them out. And there's a lot of people in prison who shouldn't be there. We've talked about IPP, the scandal of indeterminate sentences, where somebody goes in for a violent offence they might have got 18 months for, and 10, 15 years later, they're still inside because they haven't even been given the courses to try and rehabilitate themselves. What's happening here, the mechanics of this, at the moment, for most offences, most prisoners will be let out halfway through their sentence, provided it's basically a non-violent offence for which they've received under a 4-year sentence. That already happens. That's being reduced to 40% of the sentence that you will serve. So it's not a question of, well, we're going to do something we weren't going to do already. They're just hastening those releases. And there was an early release scheme anyway that's been used at various times to ease with overcrowding. So it's not that fundamental, but it won't come until September. And that's because probation services need to be ready for those people. Probation services and kind of somewhere for them to live if they don't have accommodation. Those types of things need to be in place. Is it desirable? Probably not. Is it the lesser of two evils? Is it the lesser of several evils? I think probably that's what the situation is.
But Joseph, are there some criminals? I mean, I understand for things like domestic violence or certain crimes that, you know, will be excluded from this? Basically, if it's sexual offences, if it's violent crime, sentences where somebody would have received over 4 years, that doesn't apply here. So that's right. I think probably what needs to happen, and this is where we're straying into my views with experience of, I guess, 17, 20 years working in the criminal justice system, there needs to be a radical rethink about who we're sending to prison.
Yes. this is what's happening now. Ex-boss of Timpson's, who's a very well known for building a multi-billion-pound business on the basis of taking to a great extent ex-cons, looking at them, training them, giving them a chance and teaching them to run their own business very successfully. Nobody would say Timpson's is not a successful business. Well, he's been brought in and he's basically saying that people in prison, there are some people who should be there. Most people who are in prison shouldn't be there. There are other ways to punish people. What about a home detention curfew for non-violent offenders? What about taking fraudsters and doing what we already do, which is taking away their assets? You know, a lawyer said to me, what about restricting the right to drive? Well, that's interesting, isn't it? That's a real punishment. That's a real infringement on your liberty.
And here's the thing, when you look at the number of people, there's a huge number, apparently, isn't there? 47% of prisoners are virtually illiterate, for a start. Then you've got mental health. There's a huge number of people who should have been seen by mental health services. A huge number of people who are in prison because they left care without any skills or anywhere to go to. And if you mopped those up, if you stopped those people even going into the system in the first place, then you wouldn't have quite such a problem. For people who think it's pie in the sky, one of the things I want to do on this show at a later date is have a look at the Dutch system, because they have done that, and they spend way less. And what people forget is this is costing us an arm and a leg. People come out of prison, and what happens? They just reoffend again because nothing's changed.
Absolutely. If you build a justice system around the principle of revenge upon people who are usually 1 in 3 have been in care, you're right. 1 in 9 are former armed forces. What does that say about the way in which that institution treats people? It's the last refuse. It's the last dustbin for other aspects of society don't work. And until we get our heads around that, it's all very well not having enough imagination, saying, these people are bad, they should be punished. Prison's a holiday camp anyway. Well, first of all, it's not. But until you start having a mature attitude to that, rather than just going, well, this person's done something wrong, so we need to get our ounce of flesh, our pound of flesh. It's just not working, is it? The evidence is what's happening now. Increased prison population and no less crime.